Nicolasa, it's so nice to have you here for this interview. I appreciate it. We do have a series going on Channel 28 and showing on YouTube of interviews with people who work in the arts in Santa Fe. Most of the interviews are with artists, but I'm glad to have you. I know you're a curator and you work at the Museum of International Folk Art. And it would be great for our viewers if you would just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into that, and what a curator's job is.
Okay. Well, my background is in history. Early on, I grew up around museums. My father was a museum director, and I've always liked history. I'm a 14th generation New Mexican, so kind of just hearing family stories and Santa Fe history, New Mexico history always got me interested. And another passion of mine is flamenco dance and music. So I started studying that very early on and went to Spain in high school and just fell in love with art and culture, visiting the Prado, seeing the historic collections, also seeing the transference of that history to New Mexico really spawned on my interest. And throughout school, history was always one of my favorite subjects, art also another favorite subject. And at UNM, where I went to college for both my undergrad and graduate, I majored in history and Spanish. And while in undergrad, I worked for the De Vargas Project, which was an editorial project that transcribed and translated 17th century Spanish and 18th century Spanish documents, all pertaining to Don Diego de Vargas and the recolonizing of New Mexico. And while on that project, I got a graduate assistantship to attend grad school and major in history again. And I just continued and fell into the museum world. I always knew I wanted to be a curator, work with exhibits, work with artifacts, work with art and culture. And I did start as an art historian in college, but then I switched to history because I really felt like I wanted more of that, the background info to go with the artwork. So that's where my area of emphasis has been. And I worked at Museum of Spanish Colonial Art previously, and at Casa San Isidro, which is a historic house museum owned by the Albuquerque Museum. And then when this job came open at Museum of International Folk Art, I really jumped at the opportunity because, one, it encompasses history, culture, art, basically living traditions of people, and I thought it would be a very exciting way to just immerse myself in that culture. And my actual job title is Contemporary Latino, Hispano, and Spanish Colonial Collections, because we have one of the largest southwestern collections in the U.S., which includes historic New Mexican artwork from Spanish colonial period on up through Mexican period, territorial period, and statehood, and then of course all of our contemporary artists working today. And a lot of times that artwork is still referred to as Spanish colonial, even though we're no longer a colony anymore. It's more contemporary New Mexican art, but it is out of that tradition.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by what you do and your deep interest in it, and the fact that you've really carried it through from your early years. You're continuing that, and that you're so interested in your own personal history and the Mexico history. It sounds like you've got the perfect job to meet your interests. It must be a pleasure to be working at the Folk Art Museum and working with those materials. I think we're really lucky that when we were looking for someone to take up an invitation that came through the UNESCO Creative Cities Network from Kanazawa, Japan, that you were the one who could go. I think that the way they put it was that they were looking for a curator to come and participate in the conference in Kanazawa. Mm-hmm. And we were fortunate that they were willing to pay the expenses for someone to attend, and that you had the right credentials and the time to go. And it would be lovely to spend a little bit of time. If you could tell me just a little bit about what you found out in Kanazawa, what that city's like, a little bit about their culture, I guess.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to thank you for considering me for that, because in this field I never in a million years thought I'd actually go to Japan in my profession as Latino Hispano curator. It was really exciting for me, totally new culture. I've read about Japan a little bit. My son, of course, is obsessed with Japanese movies and anime. Food I've always enjoyed, but when you're over there and you're actually seeing the country for the first time, it's a whole world of difference of what we perceive of Japan here and what it really is. And Kanazawa is a wonderful town. It's very much, I saw it as a parallel city to Santa Fe in many ways, even though they're one of the most recently added to the UNESCO Cultural Cities network, whereas we're one of the earliest cities to be added to it. But they have a 400-year history as the city of Kanazawa, just like Santa Fe has the 400-year history of Santa Fe. However, there's history preceding that, before those 400 years. But when you get to the town, many of the historic buildings are in place, of course undergoing renovation as time passes, so maybe a 400-year-old building will have work that was done 200 years ago, and then more work that was done 100 years ago, very much like our Palace of the Governors here. It's one of the oldest buildings in the US, but a lot of what we see now is 19th century restoration and that sort of thing. So the city had that aspect to it, parallel to Santa Fe, totally different architectural styles, different materials, different aesthetic, but similar histories just timeline-wise. Kanazawa is a very rich cultural city, very much like Santa Fe. A lot of artistic traditions. I found it just an amazing town with so many historic neighborhoods intact. They have the old samurai district still intact, in which the roads are like a maze and wind around, the old walls and buildings still there. And then one of the largest and oldest geisha districts in the entire country that is still intact and still in use today. And Kanazawa is the gold leaf capital of Japan, which was really just amazing for me to find out. We see so much silver here. They produce 99% of the entire country's gold leaf, and it's almost, after a few days, you're like on gold leaf overload because it's everywhere. But the minute you leave, you miss it because you don't see it as much everywhere else. And I was lucky enough to stay a couple extra days in Tokyo, and I went to a lot of gold leaf stores in Kanazawa, and I didn't purchase anything. Exchange rates were also very, very high. But when I thought, well, I'll find something small in Tokyo, and it just did not compare with the amount of gold leaf. There were gold leaf shops. There's an entire gold leaf museum in Kanazawa. Just exquisite, from very traditional boxes and fans and classic styles to contemporary dish sets to makeup, lotion, facial masks with gold leaf. Just unbelievable how they're now marketing. The interesting thing for me too is it's one of the top tourist destinations in the country for the Japanese. So it's still a location where outsiders don't particularly go. There were a few outsiders from Australia or other places, but very few. Most of the tourists were other Japanese coming to Kanazawa from different cities. And Kanazawa is also known for its beautiful Kenroku-in garden, which is, I believe it's the third largest in the country. It's in the top 5 for most famous gardens in the country. So people do flock to Kanazawa specifically to see the gardens. So the whole art of caring for the garden and the trees and the water and having all of the elements is just very present. It's right in the center of town, huge. And then from the garden, all the neighborhoods span out from the garden, and you have different museums. There's temples throughout the town. More Shinto shrines per capita in Kanazawa than anywhere else. You're just walking along and you just run into them everywhere. They have the new Museum of 21st Century Art, and they were big hosts and sponsors of the conference. The director of that museum, Yuji Akamoto, was the presiding, I'm forgetting my words here, the moderator, yes, basically, in between all the other curators and artists. And basically at the conference, they had 2 curators and 2 artists. So I was one of 2 curators. The other one was Daisuke Murata, who is the curator at the 21st Century Museum of Art. And then we had 2 artists from Ishan and Shenzhen. Shimzu Shuso is the potter from Ishan, and Ni Shushen is from Shenzhen, China. So it was very interesting to have kind of a perspective of professionals in the art world being curators and artists. And then the rest of the participants, a huge majority of them were students at the University of Art and Design in Kanazawa, and a lot of very young artists continuing ages-old traditions. However, I found it really, really unique from Santa Fe in that we had a lot of, in Kanazawa, there were a lot of younger artists doing traditional techniques and studying a traditional craft, but the work they were producing was completely contemporary, new forms, new ways of expressing that craft. And a big part of the conference was discussing how do you maintain tradition while also incorporating contemporary works. And I thought, well, that's really funny because we have those same debates here in Santa Fe, especially with New Mexican art, Spanish colonial art. When does it stop being called Spanish colonial, basically? It's a style, it's a tradition, it's a way of doing artwork. However, the imagery can change, or the outcome of the artwork can change. You could still use traditional materials, but make something that's not Spanish colonial nature as far as genre. So that same kind of thing's happening there. However, it's very interesting to me that I feel like our art is still very true to the traditional format. We have contemporary artists that choose to work in the tradition and stay very traditionally focused, but they're working now as contemporary artists. Or we have artists that do new styles. Over there at the conference, I saw very little strictly traditional work. They were all employing the traditional techniques. However, in the city itself, they're known for their pottery, they're known for the silk dyeing traditions. The shops and galleries throughout the town had very traditional work still.
Oh, okay. So do they have concerns? Did the conference have to do with that concern of where the traditional ends and the contemporary starts, or about any concerns about loss of something? Or
yes, I think it was very interesting. The participants all being very young, fresh new artists, most of them just beginning grad school or about to finish grad school. And then the curator at the Contemporary Art Museum, and it's called 21st Century Art, and a new concept too. It's, it only showcases artists who've been born since 1965. So they really are going totally contemporary. And at the museum itself, it was extremely contemporary, non-traditional. They include artists from all over the world and Japanese artists. However, at the conference, the conversation really did take the focus back to Japanese art and how do you preserve a tradition while also being contemporary. And some of those same comments about when does it cease to be what they call kaga yusen, or kaga, which is a very strong word for traditional art or heritage or culture. I'm probably not translating it exactly right, but there was a big conversation just revolving around the word. And if you're, and a lot of the artists felt, if we're employing the exact proper traditional techniques, doesn't matter if it's a box or if we're doing a life-size torso of lacquerware, and real expertly employed lacquerware, exactly how it should be done, exquisite, almost like you're looking at an obsidian mirror, but it's a new form. It's not the box that you're used to seeing. So the artists are really experimenting with that. And I think there was a little division, like the art world always has that, especially when you're talking about traditional arts, because there's the older generations that very much feel like there's a loss of their artwork. However, something I found real interesting throughout the city, again, when we're looking at historic art here, we go to historic buildings, sometimes they're more ornate to us than what our contemporary buildings are. In Spanish colonial art in particular, the Baroque styles from Europe came from Spain. They were very ornate. In New Mexico, we got less ornate, and then our art developed. However, looking at historic buildings and a lot of the historic and classic artwork, there's a minimal aesthetic to it, a very kind of functional and serene feel to it. So even old pieces can have, to us, the outsider, contemporary feel, which is, it was really interesting for me.
That is interesting, wow. Well, did you find the participation in the conference to be something that's, I don't know, opening up new doors for you or giving you new things to think about?
I think it is. It was really interesting being there because, one, it was all new to me, and then seeing their traditions. And they're very interested in hopefully doing exchanges someday where some of their artists come here, some of our artists go there, which I think would be just fabulous. of course, being from New Mexico, I love promoting and sharing my love of New Mexico and my knowledge of our traditions elsewhere, and they're very interested in us. They were very interested in how we have, you know, certain festivals and markets through the summer, how we have Spanish market and Indian market and now International Folk Art Market. They're very interested in that kind of proliferation of traditional artists working now and ways to get them out there. For me, it was wonderful to present New Mexican art, and hopefully a lot more of them will gain interest. And one of the conversations I had with Mr. Murata, who is the curator at the 21st Century Art Museum, there was a show up of an 80-year-old artist who paints on tin. Very contemporary, and I told him as we were walking through the gallery, well, I'm showing tin work in my lecture, but it's very different than this. This is so contemporary. But he fell in love with the New Mexican tin work, and he said, wouldn't that be cool someday to do a show on tin and bring New Mexican and Mexican pieces over? So something for me, I just think that would be fabulous if we could eventually do that. You know, if they had an exhibit there and wanted pieces to come over or send an artist to do a workshop, I think it would be just fabulous. Or, you know, if that particular artist is still alive, and to have her come to Santa Fe and, you know, have an exchange of people who just work with tin and color on tin or hammering different ideas.
That would be fascinating.
It would be fabulous. And then, you know, they have a very, very ancient ceramic tradition, the oldest in the world. They very much love Native American pottery here. And I do believe a potter had gone over before when they'd had a conference, and I'm forgetting the name right now, but one of the potters there just remembers that, and, you know, just wants to come to Santa Fe to see the pottery. And we are fortunate this July that the director of the 21st Century Museum of Art will be visiting. So I will be showing him the Latino collections at our museum, and he's planning to hit other museums through Santa Fe and just really get a taste of our city. It's a short trip, but I think it will be the start of a wonderful conversation between these two historic towns.
I think that's wonderful, and I think, of course, you started it when you went to the conference. And what we're finding with the city of Incheon, South Korea, that we're also having exchanges with, is that it is a conversation, you know, a visit here and a visit back, and creating a relationship over time is what's going to be really fruitful, and is already proving to be fruitful for some artists, and people have had the chance to make a trip to a different country, another city. And I'm glad to hear that Kanazawa was talking about various exchange opportunities or desires.
Yes.
I just recently met with a couple of representatives of the city of Kanazawa at a meeting I was at, and they have a student population. I guess maybe the students you were referring to, who are art students learning the traditional or using the traditional forms. They didn't really totally explain it, but they want to send a university student here for about a 2-week visit for some exchanges.
That would be great.
So I'm hoping that might happen sometime in the next school year. So
that would be fabulous.
We'll see. I'll let you know what happens about that.
Yes, definitely.
And then that's terrific that the museum director is coming here, and that some other people in Santa Fe will have the chance to meet him. I'm sure that you're going to involve other people at the Folk Art Museum, and maybe there'll be some other opportunities for meeting artists or other people in the arts community here, which will further that relationship. And
yes, I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, that tin idea is really.
Yeah, I hope that one comes to fruition, because I think it would be fabulous.
Yes.
And
I wonder if there are any artistic traditions in other cities that are part of the UNESCO Creative Cities Network that have tin.
That would
that could be interesting to look into.
Yes, definitely look into, for sure.
So, were there other things about going to that conference that you wanted to talk about, or things that might have some interest to the viewers of this interview?
Let's see. There was so much. It was, you know, it was kind of this mind-blowing experience, because you land, the next day you start, but they were so fabulous in showing the town, showing the culture, showing the history. Our first day was all touring the university, visiting all of the artists' studios and talking just one-on-one with the artists the whole day. And then the first night they did a welcome reception. And I think another fabulous thing, I'm currently doing an exhibit on food here in New Mexico and in our part of the world in Latin America. But another art form in Japan is kaikoboro, which is a type of cuisine that is artistically presented. And we had several of these meals that were just exquisite. So it was wonderful to be immersed in art and culture and then also experience this ages-old tradition in the evening where each plate is brought out artistically placed. Some might just have a leaf and one little bean on it, or one little raw shrimp with one little, but we were there right after autumn equinox and and we were there in early October. So this food is also seasonal, and the art that is presented on the plates themselves are seasonal. So the amount of ceramics and just everything you saw every day, like art just fills the lives and culture every day, especially in Kanazawa. Probably, you know, in Tokyo too, it very much does, but it's a big city with the skyscrapers of the art a lot of times. And those were, you know, fascinating and total opposite of Santa Fe, of course. But Kanazawa had this real strong feel of artistic culture and heritage that you just saw everywhere you went. And the people being so interested in it, so interested in preserving it, be it old or contemporary, they're very proud of continuing these traditions in whatever form, and very proud of sharing that culture and realizing that it's something that we need in life. I think the sister cities and working with other UNESCO cities was fabulous because it kind of bridges this gap that we're all these separate entities and that really we all have things in common, even if our pottery looks different. We have micaceous here, we have Native American pottery, then Incheon, Korea is, you know, this capital with amazing work. And again, the artist that came is very contemporary. Her work was amazing, but she loves the classics as well. And I think it was just that feeling of sharing ideas, sharing heritage, and realizing how important heritage is. Even if it's different heritage, there's these, I see them as like parallel worlds kind of that we're living in today. And I just think that was really the highlight of the conference for me. Also just how efficient the Japanese are, how wonderfully organized the conference was. Everything went smoothly, without a glitch, just fabulous.
Well, it sounds wonderful, and I'm glad that you've made so much of it and found these great parallels between the two cities, and I hope that we really see a lot coming out of it. I expect we will, that you've really started that great conversation as we talked about earlier, and that it'll be a very rich experience for Santa Feans to have some other things happening with the city of Kanazawa.
I think so.
So thank you for doing this interview. I appreciate your taking the time to do it. I know you're so busy with all of your work at the Museum of International Folk Art, and it was nice of the museum to give you the time off to go to that conference, and I hope that we will get to work with you more on other things in the future.
Yes, I'd love to do that, and thank you very much for having me.
Terrific.